Welcome to this edition of the show. We're going to go upstream to the source of why I'm doing this broadcast at all, the rationale behind the media platform, Patrick Coffin Media, and that is culture, how to restore the Christian basis of America and the West, because we are slowly or quickly, depending on who you listen to, losing it. And we're not going to get it back by accident. We have to bring it back with our own bare hands. And today we're going to talk about all manner of things connected to that overarching concept of culture. Faith, music, language, literature, poetry, and so much more with not a man, the man, Dr. Anthony Esolen, on this edition of The Patrick Coffin Show. Coming up straight ahead. Dr. Anthony Esolen is a former professor of English at an institution that shall go unnamed, although it is Providence College. He's the author of The Politically Incorrect Guide to Western Civilization and numerous other fine books about which you can find more info at patrickcoffin.media. He's currently a teaching fellow at Thomas More College of the Liberal Arts in Merrimack, New Hampshire, and writer-in-residence of the new Center for the Restoration of Christian Culture. He was on an early adopter, if you will, with his book, Out of the Ashes, Rebuilding American Culture. So glad he's able to come back to the Patrick Coffin Show. Tony, how are you?
I'm great, Patrick. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Every time I see you on Facebook or some other, whether it's Crisis Magazine or something, you're always so simultaneously winsome and deep and endlessly engaging. And your pet peeves are very often mine. So it's an honor to connect again, sir.
We're irritated by the same things. That's great.
Right. Let's just hit rewind, because I get asked a lot, and I don't know how much to disclose, because I don't know an awful lot about your rather bumpy exit from Providence College. You were the youngest full tenured professor there. You were there for 28 years?
27 years.
27 years. Most of them happy years.
25 of those 27, I thought I had the best academic job of anybody I knew.
And and so this creeping, I guess, totalitarian impulse that now controls the notions like diversity and all-inclusiveness and so on ends up being extremely exclusive to those who are attached to the great books, to the great tradition that brought us, the university and the hospital system and generalized empirical method and all the things that we treasure as Westerners, particularly as Americans. What's the Cliff's Notes compressed summary of why you felt you had to relinquish a tenured, sweet job?
Yeah, and it has cost my family a decent amount of money. My wife taught there in the night school for 15 years. That's gone. That's my daughter's alma mater. That's gone. I had a sabbatical coming up. Bye-bye to that. Yet I'm very happy where I am at Thomas More College in Merrimack, because I'm, for the first time now in many years, I am confident that what I'm doing in the classroom will be approved and bolstered and enhanced and complemented by what my colleagues are doing in their other classes. I never will come home again with the fear that I'm wasting my time, or that I'm reaching only at best a quarter of my students. Yeah, it's a completely different environment. But let me go back and talk a little bit about the business about diversity. Yeah. I called them out on it because we were getting highly political there. I called them out on it in a couple of articles at Crisis Magazine with provocative titles that I did not write. But in any case, one of the articles, I said, look, this is what I do for a living, what I've been doing for more than 2 decades. I introduce freshmen at that college to literature, art, philosophy, theology, and historical events and persons ranging over 4,000 years, things written originally in 9 or 10 different languages, coming from a good 10 or 12 different cultures, right? Ancient Greece is not the same as ancient Babylon, is not the same as Renaissance Italy, not the same as Shakespearean England, Elizabethan England. All these different cultures, right? But none of that counted as diversity, right? I mean, I could read 10 different languages, and I do. I stumble around in them. But that doesn't count as diversity. What counts as diversity is remarkably monotonous and monochrome. It has to do with contemporary Western identity politics.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if you decide that you want to study ancient Hebrew and you can find somebody who teach it to you, that will not count as fulfilling our new diversity proficiency. But if you take a course on women playing field hockey and basketball and doing ballet, women in dance and sports, that counts.
Gender studies.
So, right. So it counts if you take a course in something that everybody has seen, and that all you have to do to take a look at is to watch a certain TV channel, right? One of the, maybe the 10th or 15th most popular sports channel on the cable networks, and you'll find some girls playing volleyball for Penn State, right? But if you take a course in ancient Greek religion, that doesn't count. Or you take a course in Italian, you try to learn Italian, that doesn't count, right? It all has to do with contemporary politics, and I called them out on it. And I also called out the college for putting on its diversity page what appeared to be an open-arm welcome for the whole sexual revolution in its form right now, which is to celebrate all kinds of sexual proclivities that are, frankly, unnatural.
Leading the pack being homosexualism.
Yes, right. And obviously, we can't do that if we're Catholic. Frankly, we can't do that if we maintain any connection whatsoever to natural law thinking, okay? Because these things violate the very structure of the human body. They are biologically and anthropologically absurd. I call them out on it. And in these articles, by the way, I welcome students. I welcome students of any kind, because I don't make these political distinctions, to come and learn from me what I have to give them of a classical education, which is the best education that I know of, and which, if you wanted to take over the shooting match in a generation, you would make sure that your kids had.
Yeah. Okay?
Because I don't talk about politics in the classroom. I don't do contemporary politics. That's not what people pay me for. That I think professors who do that are stealing from the kids' parents. It's a form of theft. It's a swindle.
And
anyway,
in a way, false advertising too. If you were to, I think this is a point the late Charlie Rice made about Notre Dame. If you buy a gift of Hershey chocolates for your child, and you learn that the chocolate actually has lining of strychnine, and the child is harmed, you would sue Hershey for false advertising. So you see this trend where the university that's ostensibly Catholic will trundle out a photo of one of the leaders in a Roman collar once a year for the fundraising letter, and then the rest of it, it's Hawaiian shirt and cocktails and Catholic identities on the backdrop, almost as a kind of embarrassing carryover, like your polyester-wearing mother. Right.
Or you dip a clam into boiling water, you take it out, and you call it clam chowder. It's you dip a Jesuit priest in the quadrangles at Georgetown for a day, and then you take him out, and it's magically a Catholic college. So I was made the object of the personal object of the first ever political protest on campus that was aimed at a human being.
Yeah.
And the president of the college issued a frankly slanderous letter that went out to every single student, every faculty member, and every staff member. So 5,000 people got the letter, repudiating yours truly. And then the vice president of the college followed that up 5 days later with another letter. So my reputation was ruined by people who spend their day, instead of actually teaching students, let's say, sociology, the science of studying what societies are, they're doing contemporary politics in the classroom.
Yeah.
So those people ruined my reputation. And how do you get that back? How do you get them? What are you supposed to do? Go to 5,000 different people and say, I don't beat my wife. All right. I mean,
Well, as soon as you say things like "I'm not a racist," it's too late. You've lost. It's too much toothpaste out of the tube.
Right. Absolutely. And so here I am, who spent my whole life now teaching about a wide variety of cultures, very wide, okay, all of them different from ours and very different from one another. Not putting politics in the classroom at all, because I think it's a cheat. It's a wrong thing to do. Okay, you alienate half the class. It's wrong to do. It's wicked. Okay, and I have to be cast then as the person who is only interested in one thing, whatever one thing that may be. And so I said, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? How can I stand up now in front of freshmen who have had the well poisoned already, and how can I bring to them, when we get around to Scripture, how can I bring Scripture to them? Because they're going now to be hearing it from somebody who's been slandered.
Yeah. Yeah. Well poisoning is a good metaphor. This is tainted. This tainted water. If you drink from this classroom, the water's going to be tainted. You know, Tony. Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I then began to see that this was going on in other classes too. That things were growing had been growing rapidly worse for about 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
And I had not been the victim of it, but others of my friends had been. And I put it all together. This college is rapidly losing its identity. I mean, we kept most of our Catholic identity there, even through the bad years. But now to lose it in confrontation with identity politics after having survived the 80s and the 90s, it's insane. But things are not good there.
Is there any remote causal connection to the papacy of Pope Francis and this kind of thing, whereas your time there and other Catholic scholars who are proud to say that they're Orthodox knew that they had the full backing of the great tradition under St. John Paul II and Pope Benedict? There seems to be a kind of a default, almost ionospheric change in the church with respect to priorities. You see a lot of bad art in various churches in Europe. The latest one is, the Nativity this past Christmas, where there's, of course, a naked man. It's not a party until there's a naked man in your Catholic art nowadays.
His clothes got filched in the cloakroom at the gym there, and when he came back from working out, they were gone. So somebody had to give him a.
Yeah, well, that's I buy that theory actually.
Yeah.
But is there any? Maybe it's just a generation. Maybe the Boomer generation have come into their own in a more kind of fulsome way now, and they can make decisions and create hostile work environments for people such as yourself. And you're not the outlier here. You're of a small army who have a very similar story. And actually, there's an interesting doppelganger that I believe I've mentioned before in Toronto, at the University of Toronto, Dr. Jordan Peterson. The adjectives used in the pushback against you, homophobic, xenophobic, intolerant, sexist, and so on. These are the epithets thrown at Dr. Peterson as well, who's also been an esteemed guest here.
Completely empty. He's a brave man. I don't think that, in this case, I don't think that the papacy of Pope Francis has had anything to do with it. What happened was the president of the college, in order to gain favor with professors when he became president 11 years ago, he dismantled an onerous, time-consuming, and expensive hiring policy that the professors didn't like because it took power out of their hands to hire as they wanted. And it was also, it was a lot of trouble. But because of it, we had hired some really good people, and more important, we had avoided hiring very bad people. Well, he got rid of it. Almost everybody on the faculty wanted him to get rid of it. And, we've been hiring bad people in the last 10, 11 years. And then we got the diversity bug. We had, it's things happened that were peculiar to that particular college in certain ways. And now it's all bets are off. I mean, the whole curriculum is being recast in political terms.
Let's, because I want to turn to what you're doing now with the Center for the Restoration of Culture. I want to get the name right. Yeah, the Center for the Restoration of Christian Culture. And distinguish for us, if you will, the difference between this new idea meme known as diversity and the plurality that characterizes the Catholic faith. I mean, if you're going to, you can say whatever you want about the Catholic Church. True, pluralism, or maybe plurality is a better word, is our hallmark. We are of the whole. We are comfortable in any political environment. We have the best art, the best music.
Right.
We're literally colorblind. I don't know any Catholic who would have anything other than full joy to learn that the next pope's going to be African or so on. You know what I mean?
Sarah, yeah.
So, but that versus diversity, which seems to be a very different animal.
I've been reading a book called The Counter-Revolution by Thomas Molnar, and it's going to be a significant part of the book that I'm writing right now. Mm-hmm. And he points out that since 1789, since that's the French Revolution date, what the revolutionaries have in common is not necessarily specific political aims for that place and time, right? I mean, what generally categorizes them is a hatred of stable forms, especially as they're embodied in monarchy and the Catholic Church. So it doesn't matter what club you're using to beat the church over the head with, or to beat the whole idea of a stable human nature, or the whole idea of tradition. It doesn't matter. Okay. In previous decades, you would have used the club called Unity to beat them over the head with, and would have complained about the fact that the church did embrace this great plurality of cultures.
Yeah.
Now you use the diversity club, but they're not really interested in cultural diversity. If they were, they would be encouraging the reading of old books, but they're not. It's just a slogan now to use to turn into demons people who say, wait a second here, we actually do have a lot to learn from the past, and we actually do have a lot to learn from other cultures. That is to say, cultures very different from ours. Mm-hmm. Cultures that don't accept necessarily our egalitarianism, our political egalitarianism, or that don't accept necessarily what we've done with sex and marriage and the family, or who don't have our economic arrangements and so on, right? They're not interested in any of that. Not at all. And Jordan Peterson knows this quite well, too.
Definitionally, what do we mean by culture? I know you're an expert in etymology. Crank through the origins of culture and the connection with religion and cult and worship.
Yeah, well, there is no culture without religion. What you get instead are, these days, this is something new in the history of the world. Romano Guardini was noticing it 70 years ago and wrote about it 70 years ago.
Italian priest scholar, for folks who don't know who he is.
Actually, he was German.
Why do I think he was, maybe the name? German, of course. He's Joseph Ratzinger was one of his proteges, no?
That's right.
Okay.
And Dietrich von Hildebrand, by the way, his mother tongue is Italian.
Yeah.
Okay. But anyway, Guardini was saying we are stuck with the word culture, but what we really are facing is a non-cultural culture. It's a mass of habits picked up from the mass phenomena, mass media, mass education, mass entertainment, which are now far more prevalent than they were even in Guardini's time 70 years ago. So that's what we mean now when we talk about culture. We mean what people are absorbing from the mass media. And that includes mass schooling too, right? But culture, properly speaking, has to do with cultivation.
In the sense of tilling, right?
Yeah. So you've got this soil there, and if you let it be, it's just going to grow weeds. But if you till it and care for it and enrich it with fertilizer, you harrow it, you give it air, right? You grow things in it, and maybe you rotate crops. You care for that soil. Soil is precious. And then you hand along that tract of land to your heirs, who will do the same thing in turn, right? Maybe you plant a fruit tree whose fruit you yourself will not get to enjoy, but your children will, and the children's children will get the full tree in all of its glory. That kind of careful handing on of precious things from one generation to the next, to the next, to that, that's culture. Okay, and only that is culture. It has to do with cultivation. And we don't have that. It's the destruction of culture that the political left is engaged in now.
Extending this soil tilling, hereditary handing on of the treasures of the culture, would you say that the difference between good old-fashioned neglect or abuse of the process of handing it on or not properly tending to the soil is a deliberate poisoning of the soil itself, so that the next generation has there's no moist brown stuff to grow anything anymore?
Right. That's what's going on in our schools. Okay.
How is that happening?
Well, if you go to our schools now, and that includes a majority of private schools, I'm not only talking about the public schools, you will be taught constantly in ways that are overt and also in ways that are more subtle, that you have nothing to learn from the past except to look down upon it as despicable. That is, people in the past were miserable and stupid. Okay? Somehow this doesn't apply to primitive peoples, Aboriginal peoples in North America. They were all wonderful. Of course, they were all sinners, just as we are, and our teachers are not astute enough to ask themselves the obvious question. That is, if they think that moral progress goes along with technological progress, if that's inevitable, how come then they view the primitive or Aboriginal peoples as morally superior to these others who came with many, many centuries of technological developments behind them? Right? But anyway, they're not sophisticated enough to ask that question. But so the students learn habits of despising. C.S. Lewis in the Screwtape Letters calls it flippancy, and in The Abolition of Man, he says that it's basically the educational project of schools in his time. It's to get young people to despise by saying, we are modern, we are more sophisticated, we're up to date, and by the way, you can't make any aesthetic judgments of any value. Those are all just subjective opinions. So that allows us to just sweep the field. All the great achievements in arts and letters of the past, that can be all dispensed with, okay? So we're raising a generation not of people who are unlettered, but people who are mislettered, right? They can actually decipher the letters on a page and make out the words. They can sound out the words, but they have no idea really how to read something that was written even, let's say, in 1900. They're completely at sea. And they're proud of the fact that they can't do that because all of that stuff is garbage anyway. So those people have no culture at all, and they're easy pickings. They're easy prey for mass entertainment. They'll just soak up what they're fed.
What are your thoughts on schools that begin to throw iPads at middle schoolers, Catholic schools as well? The idea of everything is image-based and fleeting, the idea of sitting down with a book and reading the whole book, not an abridged version, but reading printed words on white page. Go ahead.
Complete morons. Why don't you just take wires, insert them into the kid's brain, and short-circuit it? Because then you are raising kids now who, in a very deep way, have not the capacity to think. Okay, let's suppose that you were a farmer in Ohio in 1850, and you had gone to school for 4 or 5 years. That was enough to teach you how to read. Okay, and of course you had a naturally developing brain. you have a few books in your house. You have the Bible. If you're Protestant, you have Pilgrim's Progress. You might have a copy of Paradise Lost. You might have a couple of copies of patriotic works like the biography of George Washington. You read these things.
Yeah.
None of these things is stupid, okay? You can go back and back. Robinson Crusoe, very popular. Go back and back to them again and again. Mm-hmm. You spend your day doing very hard physical labor, but in the relative quiet of a field where you have the noise of human action and the noise of animals, the noise of your plow or harrow, and plenty of time to think while you're doing these things.
Right.
Okay? You have a human experience of the world that our young people never have, right? And our schools are making sure that they never will have it. They'll be completely incapable of being quiet for a couple of hours and reading, thinking.
Comfortability with stillness. Was it Pascal who said modern man's problems can be reduced by the fact that he can't sit alone in with himself in a room, something like that?
Yes, and he said that. He said that 350 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's all the more so now. If somebody had said, would you take $1 million for having to spend a month in a cabin without any technology other than electricity and a stove, things like that? I said, take $1 million?
You mean
I'd pay a great deal of money.
I would pay it, yeah.
That's so. The schools who do that are tremendously stupid. The Japanese, I don't think, do that. I don't think the Japanese kids, at least what I knew of them 10, 15 years ago, they weren't even allowed to use calculators in school. The kids learned their arithmetic in abacus, which is tactile and kinetic, right? You have a bodily memory and a visual memory of the numbers.
That's the antithesis of the internet right there, tactile and kinetic.
Right.
McLuhan wrote about this in 1962 in the Gutenberg Galaxy. He predicted all of this.
Yeah, and we won't listen. It would be much better for your kids not to go to school at all, but to just stay at home and be surrounded with good books and no iPad, no iPhone, and try to restrict the television, but give them books to read and have the outdoors available to them. Yeah. I mean, even that, as stripped down as that is, so I'm not even talking about teaching them a foreign language, even as minimalist as that is, the kids would be much healthier and much more able to think than if they had gone to school.
I remember watching you on Fox News, one of the morning shows, talking about your book on 10 ways to destroy your child. It was like you were punking them. They did not get the irony. There was like no tongue-in-cheek. I found it to be hilarious. You know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know. Right. If we didn't destroy our children's imaginations, the whole economy would collapse because then people would cease buying things they don't really need, and in fact, even want.
Let's turn to the solution here. A lot of people identify New England with the Frozen Chosen and all of the exodus from the church that Philip Lawler documents so well in The Faithful Departed. But something,
and he's my boss, by the way, in the center.
I knew that he was involved in it. I didn't know what the structure was. Very, very good. I have a lot of respect for Phil Lawler, and when I learned about this Center for the Restoration of Christian Culture, I thought a bunch of things all at the same time. Thing number one, it's like a crocus coming up through the snow because of the geographical placement of Merrimack, New Hampshire, as a kind of, well, it's connected with old world ideas and the first generation of Puritans that built America. It's maybe providential that it's taken root there. I also was thinking about here near where I live in Southern California, Mission San Juan Capistrano opened in 1776. As the ink was still wet on the founding documents of America, there was already a beachhead of Catholic culture. The bells would ring to indicate 12 o'clock Mass before the Liberty Bell rang on the East Coast. So I can see an outpost of what you're doing there taking root here. Maybe that's I'm not a prophet or the son of a prophet, but just a little bee in your bonnet.
Maybe we should adopt as our patroness Blessed Mother Mary Alfonsa, that is to say, the daughter of Nathaniel Hawthorne, Rose Hawthorne.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's right. Interesting.
She rose up in New England with a descendant of one of the judges at the Salem witch trial, Judge Hawthorne, and Nathaniel Hawthorne is his direct descendant. And but by then Hawthorne, who I think was still Christian, I think he kind of sensed the fact that strand of Christianity wasn't going anywhere. It had already morphed to Unitarianism, and was in the process of morphing into outright atheism. Yeah. Right. But Hawthorne had an abiding sense of sin, so he could never buy Unitarian cheerfulness. Yeah. And they all did, said Rose. They all had a weakness for Catholic art. So they all went to Italy. They went to Italy and they hung out there. These American men of letters and British men of letters all hanging out in Italy, meeting each other, and going to Rome and seeing the classical art and seeing the Catholic art. Yeah. And from it all, Rose Hawthorne ends up becoming a Roman Catholic herself and founding an order of sisters. The Puritan streak in us is now thoroughly secular and culturally dead, though it is politically powerful. Yeah. But it's culturally dead. It produces nothing of enduring art or poetry or literature. It's dead. Okay.
One name.
It's going to be life. It's going to have to come from us.
I was thinking 2 words. John Senior.
Yes. Right.
The great Kansas City, University of Kansas City, great books
University
program.
Of Kansas.
University of Kansas City, Kansas. Yeah. There are hundreds of people who are Catholics because of his godfatherhood, including my good friend Bishop James Conley, now the Bishop of Lincoln, Nebraska, Archbishop Paul Coakley of Oklahoma, all tutored by John Senior. For folks who don't know who John Senior is, A, are you using any of his texts? And B, your thoughts on John Senior's legacy?
John Senior's legacy is the legacy of a saint. It continues to bear bumper crops of good fruit. It is spreading. I myself, just in the last several weeks, have recommended his list of the 1,000 good books to 4 or 5 different people, just coming at me with the question, what shall I do with my kids? Do you have a list of works that my kids at various ages should be reading or could be reading? Yeah. And I say, I don't have to make up the list. It's already been done for us. John Senior has done it. And so I send them to him. And the people that he taught have established schools inspired by his wisdom, here and there across the country. And what I'm getting now at Thomas More College are, so to speak, the cultural grandchildren of John Senior. In fact, we have people who teach at our college who consider themselves the children and grandchildren of John Senior. So he has brought up a mighty brood, and these people, intellectually and culturally, are increasing and multiplying.
What's the mission of the Center for the Restoration of Christian Culture? How would you summarize the goals?
Well, it's interesting that you should latch on to the fact that we are here in New England. We wish to maintain a local influence. That is, we're not just the Center for the Restoration of Christian Culture. We happen to be located in Nashua. We are located in Nashua, and so one of our priorities is to bring culture, properly speaking, to Nashua, to New Hampshire, and to New England generally speaking. We want to till this soil, okay? We are, after all, we want to be as good as our word. We're not wishing to impose from some central location a complete curriculum and vision of the world on the entire globe. We're not globalists that way. However, we want to also introduce them to the very idea of what it is to have a culture. And this now would apply not just to our locality, but to Americans in the first instance and Western man generally. What do we need to revive if we are even to be said to have a culture at all? And without religion, it's no culture. Okay, so it's like we've got several angles going here. Restoration of culture itself, the restoration of a specifically Christian kind of culture, which will be manifest in different ways in different places, and the restoration of, to sow the seeds of culture and of Christian culture specifically in this place.
How do you envision your work rippling out into what we call pop culture? Because I love books. Since I'm 4 years old, avid reader. I also love movies. I've been watching 2 movies a week for 25 years.
Right.
And a really good thought experiment I heard once was ask an audience, who's Joe Burns? Joe Burns. No one knows who it is. Well, he was Speaker of the House in 1935. Okay,
right.
So who here has heard of Shirley Temple? People laugh and all their hands go up. Well,
right.
that's the answer right there. The overarching influence of popular culture is something I think we have to pay attention to. But you can't create it. It's even a Shirley Temple or an Elvis Presley or a Steven Spielberg. Those are all downstream from that soil that we were talking about.
Right. One of the things that we're going to do, I think, I have it in mind myself, and I'm going to be hosting a wonderful woman from Providence College, or from Front Royal, Virginia. She's not a teacher at Providence.
Mm-hmm.
To come up to our college and also to the center in Nashua, and put on presentations regarding classic movies from Hollywood's golden age, which I would put between 1930 and 1965. You say that every hand will go up when you ask who recognizes the name of Shirley Temple. Well, among people aged 30 and younger now, you would get a few hands raised.
That's true.
Right. So if I mention the names, I could go down my list of 10 greatest actresses in Hollywood history, 10 greatest actors, and it's a little bit different at Thomas More College because these kids have been introduced to works of art.
Yeah. So they know the cinematic canon of the golden era.
Yeah. So they're a little bit better off than most kids would be. But still, if I say, okay, John Wayne, Cary Grant, Gregory Peck, Claude Rains, Edward G. Robinson, Gary Cooper, Burt Lancaster, a majority of young people will not recognize those names.
That's true.
If I say, and it's even worse with the actresses, actually. So if I say Ingrid Bergman, Maureen O'Hara, Deborah Carr, Barbara Stanwyck, Betty Davis, Jane Wyman, Joan Crawford,
Donna Reed,
right? They won't recognize those names at all. So even in that regard, they've been cut off from their heritage.
Yeah.
And a lot of the old movies were, so it was pop culture, and in a certain sense it was mass entertainment, but it was also, the best of it was still rooted in a recognizable culture. And there are works of art in a form of art that's worthy of being taken seriously. I think that since Hollywood, after a couple of generations, that cultural tie was severed, and you begin to have movies made by people who never knew what it was like to work the land, to fight in an army, to have to watch your parents and your older siblings and yourself work 15, 16 hours a day just to put bread on the table, to kneel beside people in a chapel or in a synagogue. They didn't have those properly cultural experiences. And so they produce stuff that's based upon previous mass entertainment stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't get out of its own loop.
You just described Frank Capra, born and raised in Sicily, right. a farmer stock, and ended up living not far from where I live now in Fallbrook, California, tilling soil for vineyards. That's what he did after 1961 when he stopped making movies. So he kind of went back to his literal roots.
Yeah, and I described John Ford and
Howard Hawks.
Tyler on the Jewish side, right? Even Billy Wilder, who is at the tail end of this golden age, was an escapee from Nazi Germany. These people had experiences of human life that were deeply cultural outside of the mass entertainment industry. That is no longer true. That is no longer true.
Let me skip around a little bit because we've only got a few minutes left. From the liturgy known as the theater, where people sit in the dark and worship the image, to the actual liturgy founded by Jesus Christ, how important is liturgical grandeur and faithfulness and reverence? Why is that at the leading edge of what you're trying to accomplish? Because for some people, it's like, what? Going to Mass, that's like a different planet. Why is it part of the warp and woof of culture?
This is crazy. We Catholics, okay, have produced, and these things that I'm talking about here are not unrelated to the liturgy proper, okay? We have produced Michelangelo, Dante, Caravaggio. Our influence produced Bach, Rembrandt, right? Handel, that we now have to put up with in our church. Ugly painting.
Trigger warning. Trigger warning.
Trigger warning, right? I mean, songs that even as pop songs are terrible, and as liturgical songs are worse than terrible. I mean, even if we went back to ordinary hymns that liturgically oriented Protestants would have been singing in the 1800s and 1900s, the early part of the 1900s, we would have far more beauty in the Mass than we have now. It's as if we think, oh, beauty doesn't really matter. You know, we can be slipshod. It's fine. No big deal. You know, we would never put up with that level of bad craftsmanship if we're buying a house. If we're buying a house, we say, oh, it doesn't really matter. The eaves are going to leak. You know, that wall is buckling, but it's okay. You know, it's still a wall. We'd never put up with it. But in a Mass, we put up with what's stupid, slipshod, sentimental, saccharine, effeminate, garbage.
I wish if you could just commit to it. Get off the fence, Dr. Esolen, please. Commit to a viewpoint here, would you?
Yeah. There's no reason for it at all, because real hymns can be cheaply had. They're just waiting. They're in the popular domain. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them, okay? And they make sense as theology. They make sense as poetry. They fit liturgical purposes and liturgical seasons. And almost all of them, okay, almost all Catholics in the United States are ignorant of almost all of those. And the few that are remaining have been Baudelarized. So you get like mustaches painted on the Mona Lisa.
Right.
You have to sing stuff that wouldn't be garbage, except that somebody has had his grubby little fingers on it and now has turned it in. Off
Broadway ballad stuff.
Bad off Broadway show tunes that can only sung by a man if he's had an operation first.
All right, so let's go from that. Here's my final question. I love your word of the day. You can find Dr. Anthony Esolen on Facebook cranking these out, which really should be a book if they're not already. These just a book on words of the day, because I love words. I love etymology. I'm nowhere near your level, but I was really fascinated by your treatment of quick. The word quick.
Yeah.
There's a Western film, The Quick and the Dead, and then we have this phrase, cut me to the quick. What's the etymology of the word quick in English?
It comes from the Anglo-Saxon word quick, which the monks spelled phonetically, C-W-I-C, and it meant alive. the idea came later on in English that if you were alive, you'd move around, okay? So that you'd dart here, you move there.
Yeah.
But quick, the original signification is simply to be alive. And it is related through sound changes that I don't have the leisure to go into, but it is etymologically related to Latin vivo, I live, I am alive, and Greek bios, which means life.
But biological life, right?
Biography, yeah. So all those words they come from the same parentage, right? Although they to our eyes they don't look alike anymore, and they don't sound alike because of various sound changes that occurred. But the thing about quick that's important is that when people used the word quickening back in the day, what they meant was that they thought that whatever was growing inside the mother's womb at that point became alive.
Because of the motion, because of the quickening, as it were.
Because, but you could now tell, because of motion, you could tell that it was alive. Okay? They didn't mean that it was alive before and now something different has happened to it. Their guess was that it hadn't been alive at all. Okay? Think of coral, right? You get sediment gathering upon coral, so the coral is building up. And then maybe at some point, this thing that's growing in the mother's womb is not inert anymore, but has come to life. Okay? Now, embryology in the 19th century proved that that wasn't true.
Yeah.
That had been alive all along. What we didn't have was like an inert thing that was gathering matter, and then boom, it would come to life after about 3 or 4 months. It would start being an organism. But it already was an organism from fertilization on.
Yeah. And that's not on religious. That's not religious dogma. That's the scientific evidence of what a human being is.
Right. So there is no excuse for anybody right now to say, well, maybe we should go back to medieval understandings of the embryo and say that we can actually kill this creature before he kicks in his mother's womb.
Right.
They discovered, right? They determined, and it was irrefutable, incontrovertible. The fertilized ovum was alive from the beginning and was its own independent, self-developing entity. Okay? It was not a part of the mother like a finger. It was not a growth on the mother like a wart. It was not inert like an acorn. It was not inanimate like an accretion of coral. It was alive, human, and organizationally, organically independent.
Even though it didn't have a foot big enough to kick. Right.
And evidence of its independence was that it would move through the fallopian tube at a time when it had no attachment whatsoever to the mother.
Oh, it's interesting.
Okay?
Yeah.
So they said, well, quickening. First of all that refers to now is the mother felt the baby kick, and some babies never do kick, right? Or the mother never feels it. But second, the idea that the baby only came alive at that time is just nonsense. Because that's what the word quickening meant. It came alive then. We know that that's not true.
All my listeners and viewers know that I'm cut to the quick. That we have to say that time has gone by so quickly, and we have to say goodbye to this episode of the show. I want to recommend, folks. It's not a great name for a book, but it's a great book. Angels, Barbarians, and Nincompoops. Etymological Studies, if you want to crank even deeper into the fascinating topic of word origins. We certainly offer our support and prayers for this Center for the Restoration of Christian Culture, that it might hit America where it lives in its quick, as it were. And the website, restorationchristianculture.org. Go there, donate there, find out more about the mission and the staff and the journal and upcoming events. And I would love to, any interaction that I can have with this would be an honor for me to do so. I think it's an answer to prayer, and I hope it gets what it deserves, which is a wide audience and great interest. Dr. Anthony Esolen, as always, thanks so much for being a gift and doing what you do so well.
Thanks, Patrick. It's been a joy to be here.
All right, we'll say goodbye to this episode and say hello 7 days from now, God willing. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?